This is The Strategic Leader, the podcast that helps people-focused leaders to think, act, and feel more strategic. And in this Series 5, we are exploring Tales from the Top Table. We're looking at the senior leadership team, what's involved in operating strategically in that team, and we've got both guests and our own perspectives to share, and we hope you find it useful.
Hello and welcome to The Strategic Leader with me, Fee Craig.
And with me, Gemma Bullivant. And we're delighted to introduce Nicola Tilbury to the podcast today. She's a director at Potter Raper, which is a construction consultancy. They advise on complex building and infrastructure projects, looking at things like project management, surveying, technical services in public and private sector projects. Nicola, I'm sure you can improve on that intro, and welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fee and Gemma, for inviting me today. Super excited to share some of my experience and what I see happening at that top table. I started in construction about 40 years ago, and I have worked client side for contractors, always as a surveyor. So I'm a chartered project management surveyor, started off as a quantity surveyor. And I love what I do. I think that the business generally has lots of accidental managers, which was me until I decided to learn a lot more about it. I am now on the executive board at Potter Raper, and we have another 11 operational directors. And I've just started a new role where very strategically the business has realised we needed more internal focus. So that's where I am now. So not long in that position, about, I suppose, 6 months.
Wonderful. I'm sure we're going to dig into that in a little bit more. And yeah, I suppose one of the reasons that we wanted to do this Tales from the Top Table topic for Series 5 was building on the themes from previous series. We are obviously really interested in strategy, but what we want to do is demystify it and help our listeners to figure out what strategy really means in different contexts and fundamentally how it shows up and how it shows up in that senior room. So I know that you've got lots and lots of that senior room experience, so we're really interested in hearing a bit more about that, and particularly about hearing your own observations of strategy as you've been working through your career. So shall we start with a fairly broad question, but something that maybe you can then expand on around when you first realised or became aware of this idea of strategy? How did you notice it? How did it show up for you?
I think that I was blissfully unaware that I was being strategic and that other people would notice that I was. So I think I'd got to a senior surveyor position, and I think as a project manager, you are pretty strategic or high level functioning operationally because you have a goal, you have a vision, you have that end point to get that scheme over the line. So you think like that anyway. And I think it was only when I started to look around the rest of our department going, actually, we could improve the way that we do things around here. We could improve the quality. And I started creating templates to assess competency levels, for example, looking at performance. And I hadn't really thought up until that point that I was. And then when I was approached to they approached me to become an associate director to start heading up a team, because they were saying you're thinking way beyond your role at the moment. So I think at that point, and that was probably in about 2011, maybe, that I realized that maybe I am thinking a little bit more strategically than I thought I was, really. Yeah, and I'm really passionate about training people and helping younger generation in the organization as well. And I think I ended up being the go-to person. So everybody was like, well, you're just naturally just falling into this role. And I didn't know at the time that was strategic at all. Back to some of your earlier episodes, you just don't realize that's what you're doing unless you intentionally think about it.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because we kind of often hear it like people being told to be more strategic. But it's interesting to hear the opposite side, which is I'm kind of doing it. It feels like common sense to me. And yet suddenly you realize you could become aware, well, actually, that is strategic thinking. And you just mentioned a few of the ideas that we talked about so much, that having an overview, maybe as a project manager, you have an overview of the big picture
Yeah.
quite a lot of the time, don't you? And you have that very clear end goal, which is like all of this is in service to that end goal. And then also your ability to kind of notice, how are we doing it? Not just what are we doing, focus on the work, but how is it getting done? And could it be improved? And what needs to happen to make it? So those themes, which we talk about a lot, are coming through so clearly in what you've described, that I'm not surprised people could see that strategic talent in you for
Yeah.
doing those things. Because sometimes we think it's like really big and grand, but sometimes it is just common sense. It is, I mean, we talk about so much, we talk about zooming out, don't we? And looking at that big picture. And that's such a lovely example of you doing exactly that.
And I think that progressed, not really noticing that then progressed. And in my journey as a director, looking when we were talking about things in geographical strategy, where we were operating, I saw a hole in the southeast of the country, and so put a business plan together to set up a new office. So that was my thing. I put that to the board, and we did discuss that. So as a strategy there, that was adapted. And I think really that was definitely the biggest helicopter view, as when I started to really realise that it was that kind of stepping back from the day to day and really thinking about longer term issues at a strategic level.
Would you say before that point, Nicola, that the business, you said the business really recognized this in you and they kind of wanted you to do more of it. Do you think the business was quite strategic before that? Or did they just kind of recognize that something was needed? You had the skills and they were drawn to get you to do more of it?
I think they were definitely drawn by the fact that I'm such a people focused leader compared to maybe some of the others. I think the term accidental leader I have heard many times, and I would say that applies to professional practices like ours, where people are generally promoted because they either bring in the work or they are really, really technically good at their role, rather than being focused on that leadership piece. And I am very focused on that. So the rest of the board liked that and wanted to bring that in to how we were operating at a senior leadership team level, really.
Oh, it sounds like you're honing in on the two terms of our podcast, which is on the one hand strategic and on the other hand leader, and almost helping us to look at both of those through a different lens and then how they come together. Because what I heard earlier was the strategic focus around delivering the projects that you were doing and having a vision, having an aim, having an endpoint. And now we've moved into more of a leadership context
Mm.
of the role and what you were noticing as well. Is that a fair observation?
100%. 100%. I think we are an SME. There are 5 offices, 170 employees. And I think as an executive board, we're really operational and we're all hands-on leaders within the business. A big part of our business model is that we still have directors involved in all of our projects. So you're expecting to try and split your brain, and you do tend to flip-flop back from
Mm.
one to the other, sometimes seamlessly without really thinking about it. And I think in an organization like ours, you've got to really intentionally think strategically, actually like wave a little flag.
Mm, yeah.
Right, right, we have to stop. We have to think strategically and take that time out of the business to do that, because it's too easy to flip back into operational matters.
Yes, we talk a
How
lot about different hats and which one have I got
Yes.
on. And I'm curious about how that sounds like it comes quite naturally and quite easily to you. You kind of got the strategic intention. You use the word intention, which I really like. But I wonder how you encourage other people to do the same. Because, like you say, it's so easy to be drawn into the minutiae of client work, working
Mhm.
in the business. How do you influence your peers at that level to stay strategic and not to be dragged in? Are you a lone wolf in that respect, or do they follow you very easily, or do you have to work quite hard to make that happen?
I have to work quite hard in some instances. I think we've had an issue really recently where lots of opinions were being put forward. But then if I raise the flag, put a pause on it and just say, we need to think about this in a much more, let's go back to what we said we were going to do. So we're not getting that opinion. We are getting that mass. We are getting that North Star, as people say, about this is why we're doing this. So that was around spending money out of our business development budget, for example. We have 5 offices, so you have to go back to that strategy of how are we growing the business, which offices need that focus rather than just personal opinion. So that is hard, but we all do talk to each other and we do listen. We have monthly meetings which do flip into operational. So we've set up regular, every 6 months we have a strategic meeting just with the exec board to review that strategy, to review the business plan. And then every year we have a full board meeting where we set up success factors. So we review the last year, set up success factors under finance, under people, under customers, under operations. And we review those quarterly. And we do monitor how we're doing with all of that as well, which works really well.
That sounds like a great setup. I'm curious actually, do those strategic meetings ever drift into operational when you're having them? Do you find you need to wave that flag that you've mentioned in those meetings to bring them back?
Yeah, we tend to have them facilitated because we know ourselves quite well. So
Ooh,
yes, we
that's
would
so
flop
much in that statement, isn't there?
we would flop back into that operational zone. But I think that's because we have been a partnership for many years. So the practice was set up in 1970 and was operating as a partnership. Then we became a limited company and we were all the shareholders. So we were the shareholders. So we are now an employee owned trust. So the level of transparency, the requirement to evidence what we are doing is there now in a level that has never been there before. So, and as an exec board, we're realizing we need to be much more formal in how we're recording a lot of this because we've never had to be, but now we do. And now our employees, who are the beneficiaries of the shareholder, need to know.
Mm.
And we have to change and adapt our thinking to match that, which has been a journey. It's an exciting journey, but it has been a journey. And I think that comes back down to having those 7 people with very different perspectives, no formal training in a lot of instances, gut reaction, gut feel.
Mm.
I'm technically very, very competent, but a whole skill set there that was missing, and especially from the people leadership type side, that people centric, people focused leaders. It's good that I'm on the board. And I think now that we're employee owned, that part of how we run the business is becoming evident and becoming visibly seen as being more important. So when we set those success factors, we're all over it when it comes to the finances, projected cash flows, this, that, and the other, targets here, targets there. Absolutely easy, easy peasy. But when it comes to looking at operations, looking internally, we've never been really great at doing that historically. So as an exec board, we made the strategic decision that I would step away from working in the business to focus on the business from a strategic level to then start implementing some of the processes that we really did need to do. Yeah.
So I'm really interested in in the point you made about getting in a facilitator to support those more strategic conversations. And you said, because we know ourselves. So that feels like a really refreshing level of awareness, which is we all have a tendency to do this. Many teams do have a tendency to kind of, get operational or get off topic or go into opinions. How did you kind of recognize that that was what was happening, have that awareness and go, we need to do something differently. We need a facilitator. And what difference has that made to this
I
group?
I think it was recognizing the need to be more formal in our strategic approach that lent to that really
So
because
more formal than what? What was it
well,
like
more
before?
formal because we were the shareholders. We were answerable to ourselves, so we all just knew it because we were in touch so much. We were a really close exec board, so it didn't feel like there was a need to necessarily write everything down in a formal strategic business plan or a formal strategy because we knew where we were going to be going just between us. And I think at that point, we only had 3 offices and then we expanded. So then it started to get more difficult. There were more strands to think about. And being employee owned, we had to have that strategy. And because I had started to become really interested in strategy and running a business more, I could see that it was missing. And that clarity of thought to avoid those opinions, it was really needed. I knew that I couldn't articulate it or convince everybody. It's like your mother telling you to do something. You don't listen, do you? But if somebody else tells you, then you might go, oh, actually, you've got a point there. So we did, and we took it right back. So there was skepticism. The facilitator was somebody that I knew and I respected. And the end, we did 2 days of an exec board going right the way back to values, to mission, what was really our own why were we doing what we were doing? And that was so refreshing because we've never done that as an exec board team. And it really ignited a lot of passion for the business from everybody. It allowed us to understand each other more, which was great. And it did really pull together what was important to us as a team to move the business forward. So, and everybody really enjoyed it, much to their shock, I think.
That all sounds very much in your wheelhouse, Fee. The old team effectiveness
Yes,
and getting to grips with who you are, and what your values are. I've heard you talk about
absolutely.
that a lot.
Yes, well, I'm trying not to go off on down a team coaching rabbit hole today because that's not specifically what we're talking about. But
Mm.
it's refreshing to hear that it's refreshing to hear that there were skeptics and yet somebody advised you to do it and that you did strip it right back and that gave you a real impetus for moving forwards. Because I think it's that often you have that reluctance to take a day or two out of the running of the business, but it's that take a step back in order to move forward, slow down, to speed up, to get that clarity and get that kind of purpose and motivation and drive. Sounds really refreshing.
And
Amazing.
super important in our case because we'd all come from being a partnership. So very siloed, very eat what you kill approach from a leadership team to suddenly a one team approach across all offices. So part of my new role is to look at consistency across all of our offices and making sure it happens. So that's where it had to start from that exec team to get that consistency across all of us. So we're all
Mm.
looking at it through the same lens, but with different opinions, but through the same lens strategically. And it has really worked. And then using that with our operational directors to take what we've done from a strategic point of view to put that into an operational sense every year, and then looking at what steps or action plans we can put in place, surprising even ourselves with how much we can actually get done in a year. So that reflection piece is also really powerful because it
Oh,
gives
you're talking my
oh,
language.
oh
Absolutely. You learn so much from looking back, don't you, in that
yes,
act of
massively.
reflection. And I guess what I'm hearing, although you haven't said it, so tell me whether I've made this up, but that being clear about our strategy, checking in on our strategy and reflecting on what's gone well or not so well, to say what are we saying no to and what are we not getting sidetracked by and what are we not going to waste time on? We could, it might be a good idea, but it's not on strategy. So
Yeah.
staying accountable to what we said we were going to do, despite all the other shiny objects that may be lying around.
Yeah.
Would that be part of that kind of reflection?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because there were different elements to our strategy, and I think maturing into the EOT model is a big part of it internally that we're looking at. And the construction industry is in turmoil at the moment. So there's lots of external influences, lots of external legislative risks going on that's affecting the market. It's quite hard to stay focused and to not panic.
And that's where strategy really does come into its own, isn't it? When the seas are choppy and things look even more uncertain and volatile, is you've got something that you can hold true to, that you've agreed and thought through, to align to when things do go a
Uh,
little choppy.
yeah. Otherwise, it's too easy to like run over there. Oh no, 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 we need to run over there now, or we all need to run in
Mm,
different directions,
mm.
which is really bad. So that's been really good for us as a business.
So if it's okay, I'd love to ask a little bit more in relation to how your roles evolved over the time you've been there, because you've been there for quite some time, which lends a certain perspective. What have you noticed you've had to change or do differently as you've been moving through your different roles?
I think communication and listening. I think one of the things that's really stuck with me is that there's more senior you get, you forget that other people don't know this stuff. And it's too easy for you to think that everybody knows this high level strategy stuff that you all talk about, because we speak about it a lot. But then
Mm,
realizing that other people don't, the employees don't. And so understanding how you frame that in a way that makes people react in a positive way to that strategy. They want to be involved. That's really important. And that happened even this week. We were in an L&D session with my HR manager and a more junior person who's kind of got involved in the apprenticeship program that we're looking to put in place. And the strategy, the vision is to have an early years development academy set up. Like some of the bigger organizations do that. We don't have that in a formalized way. Something we're working on, but we have a strategic plan and a goal to get there in 2 years' time. So we're doing elements of it and just really witnessing the junior member who was full of passion, which was great. And he had added some to a handbook for our apprentices, then listening to my HR manager from a very operational point of view talking about it. And then I suddenly felt myself stepping back out of the conversation and then laying on top of what we were talking about, the actual strategy that was there and why we were having this conversation and where we wanted to get to and how it interacted with other parts of the business.
mm,
And that was fascinating because that was very intentional of me.
mm,
And I don't think I've done that much before. But really,
mm.
you have to share that message with everybody who's in your business to get them to buy into it as well.
There's lots there, isn't there? There is scooping up that on the ground wisdom and insight and passion and kind of nurturing that. And then there's sort of zooming back out to our big strategic question: what are we actually trying to achieve as a business? And therefore, what do we need out of this conversation? And who needs to be in this conversation? And how do I steer this conversation? There's so much, isn't there, in terms of a strategic perspective. It will be very easy to sit in a room for an hour with somebody and just get excited about a new thing and totally lose sight of that big picture and where do we actually need to go, and will all of these ideas that we're discussing they may all sound great, but will they move the dial in the way that we need it to move over the long term, given that this is potentially 2 years away, it is pretty long term. But to be having all of those different levels of thoughts in your head, kind of
Mm.
during the same conversation, does feel like a strategic skill. I think it would be very easy to get stuck in one of those positions and you're kind of moving between them quite comfortably, it seems like.
Oh, Absolutely, you do. You fly up and down very, very quickly, and you fly sideways because you're thinking about other parts of the business that would be affected by this. And it comes back to your point, Fee, around what you can't do. You
Mm.
can't prioritize everything. So it's breaking it down into those elements. So some of those we're doing at a quicker pace,
Mhm.
but gathering it all together will take a longer.
Mhm. I like that. I like that visual. I like that visual of zooming up and down and then zooming sideways to kind of look at who else is affected and, what happens if we take this that way? What happens if we take it that way? Or what happens if we take it in all directions? It's a lovely sort of, I don't know, is that a visual? I don't know what it is. I might need to sit on that when I come up with a model.
And
That kind of constant movement, agility, sort of intellectual agility between the nuts and bolts of the conversation I'm in right now and it fitting and touching and connecting to all those other kind of axes, I suppose.
I'm desperately trying to come up with a metaphor, and I can't get out of my head those cameras that are on a piece of string that go over a sports ground, and they zoom up and give you a big panoramic, and then they go right the way down into the scrum or the action on the field and the look on the referee's face, and then they zoom back out again and across the crowd, and that's the metaphor I've come up with in my mind.
And I'm on that camera. I completely agree with you. It is doing exactly that. Being able to do that is really important.
And that's a really, really helpful reminder. Thank you, Nicola, because we often talk about zooming out, the helicopter view. We've talked before about getting onto the balcony. You're on the dance floor, you get onto the balcony. But actually, what you're reminding us is that it isn't just about being on the balcony. It's switching and moving between the two in the right way, getting into the detail, pulling away from the detail, looking across the room, coming back into the detail, coming back onto the balcony. There's a dynamic that's going on all the time. It isn't just remember to lift up and look at it from above. It's much more than that, isn't it?
And I think it's the ability to keep on going, why? Why are we doing this? Is this the right way? I think thinking about that, slowing yourself down to start thinking about those questions on a more regular basis until it becomes normal.
Yes.
I like
That's
that idea of slowing yourself down because actually what you're doing, I think, is just doing some really good quality deep thinking. And I think we need to be acting all the time, busy, busy, busy. There's this kind of, busy work idea, isn't it? Which is I should be doing all the time. And the more senior you become and or the more strategic you become, that idea to slow down and go, right, hold on a sec, let me just check my thinking on this. Let me just make sure my thinking is quality and deep and the right shape and the right width, that have the right
Mm.
so I think there's probably still an awful lot going on in there. We might describe it as slowing down because we're not necessarily doing anything, but as a mental practice, checking the thinking feels quite meta, but it feels quite important. So is my thinking on this subject good enough? Is my thinking what's required? So I really like that idea of slowing it down, but I think there's still an awful lot going on
Mm.
in those moments.
Mm. Mm. As we approach the end of this episode, I wonder if perhaps, Nicola, you could share one or two learns or a bit of advice you might give leaders or aspiring leaders, people maybe who are about to step into an exec level role or have just done that, or maybe are in there and thinking, oh, what on earth am I doing? What kind of advice can you share for them?
I think, firstly, I think I'm one of the newer members of our exec team, so I can just think about some of the things that I had struggled with. But I think don't be frightened of asking questions and challenging the status quo, because I think if a team has been together for quite a long time, they get comfortable. They get comfortable with the way things are. So challenging that is great to do that. Be a disruptor, so say, because it just allows that group to start really looking, are we doing this in the right way? Is there, because life changes, so it's not going to stay the same. So I think, yeah, definitely challenging the status quo and don't be frightened of asking questions, because generally I normally find that most people in the room were quite willingly happy that you've asked that question. So I think that's definitely, and that goes for everything, doesn't it? All the way through your career, I think asking questions. I think being prepared for different opinions. normally you've grown up, I think, through through an organisation by being in charge, having your own fiefdom, but then suddenly you're going to be up there with a lot of other opinionated people because they are also of the same mould. So being prepared for different opinions can be a shock. And I think being prepared for the weight of responsibility, which I don't think really hits you until you are. I think you're very conscious that the decisions you are making affect so many people, and that can weigh on you quite heavily and can become you can become really heavy that you haven't had before.
Mm.
And I think there's you become lonelier. Be prepared to be lonelier.
We have heard that, yeah, and experienced that because there's fewer people in the organisation that are going through what you're going through.
Mm. And you can't
Um,
necessarily share.
Yes, there's less that's available for sharing. There's common knowledge. Yeah, interesting point. Really
Yeah,
interesting.
and definitely thinking about things beyond your own department or your own section. So it's listening to somebody else's viewpoint. And I think one of the things I think, Fee, you've said before is about that disagree and commit. I've actually used that phrase in our exec board
Yeah,
because you can't all agree on something.
yeah. But you need
But you
people.
can understand people's points of view.
Yeah.
So you do have to, and you have to flex that muscle. You have to practice that because that's quite hard.
That's an excellent point, and there's some proof that Nicola listens to our other podcast episodes because we haven't actually mentioned the disagree and commit in this episode. So if you're wondering what Nicola's referring to, have a dig back into some of our previous episodes because there's some great stuff in there about that very topic of disagree and commit and other things as well. Wow, that's been such a rich conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Nicola. We're really, truly grateful for your time.
Thank you so much for letting me share some of my experience.
Thank you so much for coming on, Nicola. I think you're an absolute classic definition of a strategic leader. You've been absolutely brilliant and shared so much wisdom on the podcast today. So we're really grateful, and I'm sure all our listeners are too. Thank you so much to everybody for listening. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Jem. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. We'd love it if you could subscribe or maybe share with a colleague or just leave us a quick review.
And if you have a big, hairy question you'd like us to explore, or perhaps a strategic dilemma you're wrestling with, just drop us a line. gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk.
And remember, having a strategic viewpoint doesn't necessarily mean having all the answers. It's more about asking better questions, broadening your view, and staying curious.
We'll see you next time.